The camera pans over a dimly lit study, dust motes dancing in the flickering candlelight. A journal lies open, revealing a cryptic letter with faded ink. Poirot's voice, calm yet urgent, cuts through the silence. In the shadows of history, there are secrets so powerful they can change everything if they're ever uncovered. But Sir Arthur Blake was murdered before he could reveal the final truth. What did he discover that was worth killing for? And who would stop at nothing to keep it hidden? The camera zooms in on the letter, the words blurred, hinting at something forbidden. The truth is closer than you think, but will it be enough to stop the danger that's still lurking? If you want to uncover the mystery, like, share, and subscribe for the next shocking revelation. Don't miss the truth behind the murder. Chapter 1. The Vanishing Witness. The morning mist hung heavily in the air as Hercule Poirot arrived at the grand estate of Sir Arthur Blake, a renowned historian. The sprawling grounds were eerily quiet, the only sound the rustling of leaves in the light breeze. As Poirot walked up the stone path to the grand door, he felt the weight of the mystery that awaited him. Inside, the air felt stale, as though the house itself had held its breath since the tragedy. Sir Blake, an esteemed scholar known for his obsession with uncovering royal secrets, had been found dead in his study, locked from the inside. The police, baffled and confused, had been unable to make sense of the situation. There were no signs of forced entry, and no one had heard anything unusual the night of the murder. Yet Sir Blake was dead, and someone had taken the manuscript he had been working on for months, the manuscript that was said to hold a secret of great significance. Poirot was led into the study, the room where the tragedy had unfolded. The room was impeccably neat, a testament to Sir Blake's meticulous nature. His desk, the centerpiece of the room, was covered with piles of old books, papers, and notes, fragments of a lifetime of research. But there was something unsettling about the way everything was arranged. Poirot's eyes immediately settled on the chair by the desk. It was slightly askew, positioned as though someone had been sitting in it just moments before the police arrived. The room, which should have been bathed in the soft glow of morning light through the large window, was instead filled with an oppressive silence, as though the very air held the tension of the unanswered question. Poirot knelt down beside the desk, examining the locked door. It was a simple lock, easily tampered with, yet it appeared untouched. He then turned his attention to the window, noting the faint marks on the sill, almost imperceptible unless you were looking closely. A small smudge. Poirot's eyes flickered with recognition. It seemed as though someone had attempted to open the window, but had been unsuccessful, leaving behind the faintest trace of their efforts. Why would someone attempt to unlock the window, only to give up and leave it as it was? Poirot could sense that this small detail held the key to the mystery. Mrs. Hamilton, the personal servant who had been present the night of the murder, was the only witness to the events leading up to Sir Blake's death. But when Poirot questioned her, she seemed oddly evasive, speaking of the night in a tone that was too calm, too rehearsed. She claimed to have heard nothing, seen nothing, and had no idea how the murderer had gained access to the study. But Poirot wasn't convinced. There was something in her eyes, something she was hiding. Her posture was too rigid, her answers too perfect. Poirot knew that people often concealed their secrets in subtle ways, and Mrs. Hamilton, was no exception. Poirot asked Mrs. Hamilton to recount the events of the night in more detail, watching her carefully as she spoke. She mentioned hearing Sir Blake talking to someone in his study, a low, indistinct conversation that lasted well into the evening. Poirot's curiosity was piqued. Who could Sir Blake have been speaking to in private, and why was this conversation not reported by the police earlier? As Poirot continued to question her, he noted the nervous glances she cast towards the corner of the room. There, in the dim light, stood a tall, antique bookcase. It was slightly ajar, as though it had been moved recently. Poirot's keen eyes narrowed as he realized that the missing manuscript might be hidden behind the books. With a polite but firm gesture, Poirot moved towards the bookcase, examining the shelves carefully. And then, there it was. A single book, out of place, its spine slightly askew. Poirot pulled it free, revealing a hidden compartment behind it. Inside the compartment was a small, ornate box. Poirot opened it slowly, revealing a folded sheet of paper, one that appeared to be a letter. He gingerly unfolded it, reading the hurriedly written words. The letter was signed by a name Poirot recognized, Edward Forsyth, a rival historian and a man who had publicly clashed with Sir Blake over the legitimacy of his research. The letter, it seemed, was a warning. Forsyth had threatened to expose Sir Blake's findings, to discredit his work and ruin his reputation if Blake did not cease his research into the royal secrets he had uncovered. But what had Blake discovered? Why had Forsyth been so desperate to stop him? And more importantly, had Forsyth's threats been the catalyst for the murder? Poirot's mind raced as he examined the letter. The atmosphere in the room grew heavier, filled with the weight of the truth that lay just beyond reach. The question of who had killed Sir Blake was no longer a simple matter of a locked room mystery. It was a puzzle of much greater complexity, one that involved long-buried secrets, hidden motivations, and a history that no one was willing to confront. Poirot stood still for a moment, absorbing the details, his sharp mind already weaving together the threads of the mystery. He knew that the key to unlocking this case was not just the evidence in front of him, but also understanding the people involved. The missing manuscript, the rival historian, the evasive servant, each was a piece of the puzzle. But it was the final witness, the one who had seen everything yet said nothing, who would hold the ultimate truth. With a final glance at the bookcase, Poirot turned to Mrs. Hamilton. "I do not believe you, madam," he said softly. "The truth, it seems, is closer than you think." And as Poirot stepped out of the study, the silence that had once filled the room seemed to lift, replaced by the quiet anticipation of the unraveling mystery. The vanishing witness, he knew, was the key to the case, and he would find the truth, no matter how deeply it was buried. Chapter 2. The clue in the manuscript. The morning after Poirot's first visit to Sir Arthur Blake's estate, a quiet tension hung over the house like a mist that refused to lift. The lingering silence seemed to have taken root, and every step Poirot took through the grand corridors felt deliberate, as though each footfall echoed with questions that had no answers. Mrs. Hamilton, the loyal servant who had witnessed nothing, appeared as though she, too, were waiting for something. For what? Poirot could not yet say, but he would find out. Poirot, ever the meticulous observer, called for a second round of interviews with the household staff. He first turned his attention to the housekeeper, Miss Crawley, who had been with Sir Blake for many years. She had, after all, been closest to Sir Blake in the final days of his life. She sat in the drawing room, hands folded tightly in her lap, her eyes cast downward, the shadows of her thoughts dancing in the corners of her mind. She had known Sir Blake well, his obsessions, his peculiarities, and, as Poirot would soon learn, his increasing unease about something in his latest research. "Miss Crawley," Poirot began, his voice soft but firm, "it is crucial that you tell me everything you know about Sir Blake's state of mind in these last few weeks. Was there any change in his behavior? Perhaps something out of the ordinary?" The housekeeper's lips trembled, but she nodded. "He became distant, monsieur. He spoke often of a secret, one that he was determined to uncover, but he rarely spoke of it directly. He seemed to believe that someone was watching him, following him, even here in the house." Poirot's eyes gleamed with interest. "And did he mention anyone? Perhaps a name?" Miss Crawley hesitated, then whispered, "Yes, there was Edward Forsyth. He came to the house just days before the murder. They argued about the manuscript, Monsieur Poirot. Sir Blake was adamant that Forsyth was trying to steal his work. He said he would expose Forsyth as a fraud." Poirot's mind clicked into place. Forsyth, the rival historian, was not merely a colleague. He was an adversary, someone who had everything to lose if Sir Blake's research was to be revealed. And now, the manuscript, the very document that Forsyth and Blake had argued over, was missing. Could Forsyth have gone to extreme lengths to stop Sir Blake from revealing his findings? "Miss Crawley, when did Forsyth leave?" Poirot asked, his voice as smooth as velvet, laced with intrigue. "He left the evening before, monsieur," she replied. "But Sir Blake seemed unsettled. He didn't sleep much that night, and he kept pacing in his study. I had never seen him like that before." Poirot gave a small nod. That night, the night of the murder, it seemed that the puzzle pieces were slowly falling into place. Forsyth had been present in the house, his argument with Sir Blake still echoing in the air, and now it was clear that Sir Blake had felt threatened. Poirot then moved to his next interview, Edward Forsyth himself. The historian had been waiting in the study, sitting with a calm demeanor that Poirot found almost too perfect. Forsyth looked every bit the part of a scholar. Sharp features, dark eyes that seemed to scrutinize everything, and a quiet confidence that bordered on arrogance. But beneath his composed exterior, Poirot sensed something deeper, something he would have to uncover. "Mr. Forsyth," Poirot began, his tone polite but unwavering, "I must ask you about your visit to Sir Blake's estate. What was your purpose in coming here?" Forsyth's eyes flickered, but his expression remained unchanged. "I was simply visiting a colleague, Poirot. We had our differences, yes, but we had been friends once." "Friends?" Poirot repeated, raising an eyebrow. "But you argued, no? You were not so friendly." Forsyth sighed, a thin smile pulling at his lips. "I was frustrated. Sir Blake's research had gone too far. He was obsessed with some old secret, one that no one needed to know. I told him to stop, but he refused. That is the truth." Poirot studied Forsyth's face, searching for the lie beneath the surface. There was something about his refusal to acknowledge the deeper implications of his words that felt rehearsed, as though he was protecting something or someone. "And when did you leave, Mr. Forsyth?" Poirot asked. "I left that evening, before the murder," Forsyth replied quickly, but Poirot detected a slight twitch in his fingers. an involuntary movement that spoke volumes. The scientist's mind worked, calculating the distances, the timing, and the logical conclusions. Poirot's voice softened, as if he were sharing a secret. "Did you by chance notice anything unusual, Monsieur Forsyth? Something out of place?" Forsyth paused, his lips parting slightly, but the words never came. Poirot knew he had caught him off guard. Forsyth was hiding something, a small detail that he did not want to reveal. Poirot knew it. Forsyth was lying, or at least concealing part of the truth. Poirot's attention then turned to the missing manuscript. There had been no trace of it in Sir Blake's study, but something in Miss Crawley's account had sparked an idea. What if the manuscript had not been hidden in the obvious places? What if it had been stashed somewhere out of sight? Poirot made his way back to the study, carefully retracing his steps. His eyes scanned the room once more. The desk, the shelves, the window. He stopped when he saw the faint imprint on the carpet near the bookcase. A subtle disturbance in the dust, just enough to indicate someone had moved something recently. Poirot knelt down, his fingers brushing gently against the wood of the bookshelf. There was a slight give, a hidden compartment beneath the false panel. With a soft click, the panel slid open. Inside, tucked carefully away, was a small leather-bound book, the manuscript. Poirot's heart quickened slightly. This was the breakthrough he had been waiting for. He carefully opened the book. Inside were detailed notes, sketches, and more of Sir Blake's research. But there was something more. A set of cryptic symbols, unfamiliar to Poirot, but clearly of great importance. But as he continued to scan the pages, one name kept appearing: Isabel Warren. The name of a woman long thought to be lost to history, yet here it was, repeated with a sense of urgency. Poirot closed the manuscript slowly, his mind racing. Who was Isabel Warren? And why had Sir Blake's research centered around her? Could she be the key to understanding the murder? As Poirot stared out of the study window, the weight of the mystery deepened. A historic secret, an ancient name, and a rivalry that had turned deadly. The final pieces of the puzzle were beginning to take shape. But what would they reveal? Chapter 3. The Shadows of the Past. The morning air was still thick with anticipation as Poirot made his way through the grand hallways of the Blake estate, his mind turning over the clues he had uncovered. The manuscript had been found, but it held far more than Sir Arthur Blake's work on royal history. It had opened a door to secrets far older and darker than anyone had anticipated. As Poirot's polished shoes echoed softly on the polished floors, he couldn't shake the feeling that the answer to Sir Blake's murder was not just hidden in the present, but buried deep in the past. In the study, Poirot had spent hours with the manuscript, noting the curious markings and references to Isabel Warren, a woman whom Sir Blake had written about obsessively. But who was she? What was her connection to the royal secrets Blake had been researching? The name alone held weight, as though it were more than just a historical footnote. It seemed to breathe with a life of its own, as if the truth behind it had been buried deliberately, waiting for someone to unearth it. Poirot, having made his observations in the study, now turned to the task of uncovering more about this enigmatic woman. He needed answers, and the best way to find them was to follow the trail she had left behind. He began by seeking information from the few remaining pieces of Sir Blake's correspondence, letters from Isabel Warren, dating back decades. These letters were riddled with hints, unspoken words, and cryptic references to a long-forgotten time. Poirot sat in his quiet corner, reading through them carefully. There were a few letters signed simply Isabel and others with a formal tone, each carrying traces of urgency that spoke of an ongoing correspondence. Yet none of them directly referenced the full secret Sir Blake had been so intent on discovering. Still, something stood out. Each letter spoke of a time when Isabel Warren had been involved with a powerful family, a family tied closely to the royal court. The letters hinted at a scandal, a forgotten affair that could shake the very foundations of the monarchy itself. Poirot could feel the weight of the past pressing down on him as he read between the lines. The mystery surrounding Isabel Warren was not just a historical curiosity. It was a living, breathing puzzle that intertwined with Sir Blake's final moments. He needed to know more about the family she had been connected to. Something told him that the key to Blake's research, and perhaps his murder, lay within their shadows. With a renewed sense of determination, Poirot set off for the Warren estate, a stately manor located several miles outside of London. It had been years since anyone had spoken of the family, and even longer since they had made their mark on history. But there was still something about them that lingered in the air, as if the echoes of their past were too powerful to fade away completely. As Poirot arrived at the manor, he couldn't help but notice how the place seemed almost forgotten, like a relic from another time. The gardens were overgrown, the windows dusty, and the once magnificent facade now showed the cracks of age. He was met at the door by Margaret Warren, the grandniece of Isabel Warren. She was a woman of middle age, her face calm and composed, but there was something in her eyes that hinted at a deeper understanding, a knowledge she wasn't yet ready to share. Poirot wasted no time with pleasantries. He got straight to the point, his voice gentle but insistent. "Madame Warren, I am investigating the death of Sir Arthur Blake. His recent research brought to light your family's involvement in a matter of great historical significance. I believe your great-aunt Isabel Warren may hold the key to understanding it." Margaret Warren's face shifted, the calm mask faltering for just a moment. She seemed taken aback, but she quickly regained her composure. "My Aunt Isabel," she said, her voice quieter now, "was a woman of great secrets. She was once part of a world that no longer exists, a world of power, court intrigue, and hidden alliances. But those secrets were meant to remain buried. They were dangerous, even to speak of." Poirot's gaze sharpened. "Dangerous, you say? What kind of danger could a family secret from so long ago still pose?" Margaret's eyes darted around the room, as though she were afraid of someone overhearing. Isabel was the keeper of something precious, something that the royal family wanted to remain hidden. It wasn't just a love affair, as Sir Blake may have believed. It was a betrayal, one that could have upended the entire monarchy. The secret she kept was not just about bloodlines or titles. It was about the very foundation of the throne itself. Poirot's heart skipped a beat. This was what Sir Blake had uncovered, the truth that had been buried. It wasn't just a historical footnote or forgotten scandal. It was a living, breathing truth that threatened to expose the monarchy's very foundations. Isabel Warren had held the key to a legacy that some had worked tirelessly to protect. But why did Sir Blake choose to investigate this now? Poirot asked. Why the obsession with this secret? Was it because of Isabel's letters? Or had something changed? Margaret looked away, her eyes clouded with sadness. Sir Blake was not the first to seek out my aunt's secrets. There were others before him, men who wanted to claim the truth for their own purposes. But Sir Blake, he was different. He thought he could protect it, use it for something greater. He never realized how dangerous it was. Poirot's mind raced as he pieced the puzzle together. Sir Blake had discovered something far more dangerous than he had realized. He had uncovered the truth about Isabel Warren's past, something the royal family had been desperate to keep hidden. The motive for Sir Blake's murder was not simply to stop him from publishing his work. It was to silence him before the truth could be exposed. Poirot's next move was clear. He needed to delve deeper into the Warren family's history to understand the full extent of the secret that had cost Sir Blake his life. But as he left the Warren estate, he felt a sense of foreboding settle in the pit of his stomach. The shadows of the past were not just lingering, they were closing in. And Poirot knew that the closer he got to the truth, the more dangerous the path ahead would become. As he left the estate, Poirot looked back once more, the weight of the case heavy on his shoulders. Isabel Warren had once been the keeper of a royal secret, and now it seemed she had left behind a legacy of death and betrayal. The tension in the air thickened, but Poirot, ever the calm and composed detective, remained steady. He would uncover the truth, but some truths, he knew, would come at a cost. Chapter 4. The Hidden Correspondence. The day had grown overcast as Hercule Poirot arrived back at the Blake estate, his mind still turning over the revelations from his visit to Margaret Warren's home. Sir Arthur Blake's murder was no longer just a case of a locked room mystery. It was now tangled in a web of historical secrets, royal conspiracies, and family betrayals. The deeper Poirot dug, the more he realized that the murder was not just about a missing manuscript. It was about silencing a truth that could alter the course of history. Poirot's steps were quiet as he moved through the estate, the once grand halls now feeling colder, more oppressive. The air seemed heavy with unspoken words, the walls themselves bearing witness to secrets that had long been buried. He had already spent hours combing through Sir Blake's research in the study, but one thing continued to bother him: the letters from Isabel Warren. Those letters, scattered, incomplete, and filled with cryptic references, held a clue that Poirot was certain had been overlooked by others. As Poirot sat down in Sir Blake's study, the room still smelled faintly of tobacco and ink, remnants of the late historian's presence. The desk was as orderly as it had been the day before, but there was something different about it now, a sense of finality that hung in the air. Poirot, with his usual precision, began to sift through the papers once more. He had already found the hidden manuscript, but now it was the correspondence that he needed to study closely. What had Sir Blake discovered about Isabel Warren that was so dangerous? Among the scattered papers, Poirot found a small stack of letters tucked beneath a thick folder. Letters from Isabel Warren, but these were not the ones he had previously read. They were newer, more urgent, written in a style that was almost frantic. One letter in particular caught Poirot's attention. The ink was smudged, as though it had been written in haste, and the words were jumbled, as if the writer had been overcome with emotion. He unfolded the letter carefully, reading the words as they appeared on the page. "Arthur, you must stop. The truth we both know is too dangerous to expose. If you persist, you will bring ruin, not just to yourself, but to everyone involved. The family you've come to believe in, the legacy you think you are uncovering, is not what it seems. You've been deceived." Poirot paused, his fingers resting on the letter. The tone was one of desperation, a warning issued too late. Who was Isabel Warren warning Sir Blake about? And what truth had he uncovered that was so perilous? The letter ended with a chilling final line. "Leave this alone. For your own sake, I beg you, Arthur. If you do not, the consequences will be far worse than you could ever imagine." The words were clear, but they only raised more questions. The family Isabel spoke of, who were they? And what was the secret that had driven her to write such a letter? Poirot's mind was racing as he continued to read through the rest of the letters. Some were more formal, others hinted at a deeper relationship between Isabel and Sir Blake. But each letter shared a common theme: a warning, a plea to stop, and the constant reference to a family secret that could destroy everything. Poirot's mind flickered back to the details of Sir Blake's investigation. He had been on the verge of uncovering a scandal, something so potent that it had driven him to continue his research despite the growing dangers. Poirot had learned of the rivalry between Sir Blake and Edward Forsyth, but this new letter indicated that Forsyth was not the only threat. It appeared that there were far more powerful people who would stop at nothing to ensure the truth remained hidden. Poirot stood up from the desk, pacing around the room. The pieces were falling into place, but there was something he had yet to grasp: the true nature of the family secret. He turned back to the manuscript, flipping through its pages, trying to find a connection between the letters and Blake's research. As he read, he came across a passage that seemed to mirror the warnings in Isabel's letter. It spoke of a royal bloodline, one that had been lost to history, but was crucial to the future of the monarchy. Sir Blake had been close to uncovering the identity of the rightful heirs, those whose bloodline had been suppressed for centuries. Poirot's eyes narrowed as he processed the implications of this discovery. The family in question was not just tied to history, they were tied to power. And if their existence were revealed, it could bring down the entire establishment. This was not just about a historical footnote. This was about a royal legacy, one that had been kept hidden for a reason. Poirot knew that Sir Blake's murder had been about more than silencing his research. It had been about stopping him from revealing the truth about this hidden family. And now, with the clues before him, Poirot understood that someone had been willing to kill to protect that secret. But who? Who had the power to go so far to ensure that the truth never came to light? Just as Poirot was about to delve deeper into his thoughts, there was a knock on the door. The moment was broken, and Poirot turned to find Mrs. Hamilton standing in the doorway, her face pale and drawn. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, her voice trembling, "there is someone here to see you, a man. He claims to know something about Sir Blake's research. I believe you may want to speak with him." Poirot's interest was immediately piqued. A new player, perhaps? Someone who could shed light on the mystery? He nodded, signaling for Mrs. Hamilton to show the man in. The door opened, and in walked a tall, thin man dressed in an impeccably tailored suit, Edward Forsyth. The rival historian, whose name had come up so often in Poirot's investigation, now stood before him, his face an unreadable mask. "Ah, Monsieur Forsyth," Poirot said, his voice steady but carrying an underlying current of suspicion. "It seems we meet again." Forsyth smiled faintly, but there was something in his eyes, something that suggested he was no longer the detached scholar he had once appeared to be. "I've come to tell you what Sir Blake uncovered. I believe it's time the truth was known. But be warned, Poirot. What you uncover may be more than you bargained for." Poirot's heart quickened, but his face remained impassive. He motioned for Forsyth to sit. "Please, monsieur, do tell me everything." As Forsyth took a seat across from Poirot, the room seemed to grow even colder. The answers Poirot had been searching for were now within his grasp, but they were cloaked in darkness, and the suspense was thick, almost suffocating. Poirot knew that whatever Forsyth had to say would either bring the case to a close or lead him down a path so tangled with danger that the truth would be harder to reach than ever before. Chapter 5. The Mysterious Stranger. The evening was falling slowly over the Blake estate, casting long shadows across the grounds. The sun dipped low, turning the sky a soft purple, but inside, the atmosphere was heavy, saturated with the weight of secrets that had yet to be revealed. Poirot sat by the large window of the study, watching the quiet garden below. He had been deep in thought all afternoon, piecing together the scattered fragments of evidence that had led him to the unsettling realization. Sir Arthur Blake had uncovered something far more dangerous than anyone had anticipated. But despite the answers he had already uncovered, Poirot knew there was still more to the puzzle. Something, or someone, was still hiding in the shadows. The subtle ticking of a clock echoed in the room, almost soothing in its regularity, as Poirot's mind turned over the tangled threads of the case. He had learned much about the royal secret Blake had been investigating, the hidden family line that could shake the monarchy to its core. He had learned about the dangerous rivalry between Blake and Forsyth and the cryptic warnings in Isabel Warren's letters. But the question still remained. Who had murdered Sir Blake, and why? Poirot had been hoping for a breakthrough, but he knew that sometimes the truth could only come to light when all seemed quiet. It was then, in the midst of this contemplative silence, that the door to the study creaked open. A figure stepped into the room, tall, with a cloak that seemed to blend seamlessly with the dim lighting. His face was partially obscured by the shadow of his hood, but Poirot could make out the sharpness of his features. The man had an air of mystery, of something hidden, and it was clear from the moment he stepped into the room that he was not someone who had been invited. Poirot's sharp eyes narrowed slightly. He had been expecting someone, another witness perhaps, or a connection to Sir Blake's research. But this man felt different. He carried a quiet energy, one that seemed to pulse with secrets of its own. "Good evening, monsieur," Poirot said calmly, his voice smooth and composed. He had already studied the stranger's every move, noting the confident but careful way the man stood in the doorway. "You have come at an opportune time. What can I do for you?" The stranger stepped further into the room, his dark eyes glinting with an unsettling intensity. "Monsieur Poirot," he said, his voice low and measured, "I believe we have much to discuss. I am here because Sir Arthur Blake was not only my colleague, but my friend, and the work he was doing the work he was so close to uncovering. It is more important than you can imagine. Poirot motioned for the man to sit, his expression unchanged. "Please, tell me who you are," Poirot said, the words spoken with the same gentle precision that characterized his every movement. The man removed his hood, revealing a chiseled face, pale skin, and dark, intense eyes. "I am Langley," he said simply, taking a seat opposite Poirot. "I was Sir Blake's closest confidant in his research. We were working together on uncovering the truth behind the royal family's lost bloodline. But Sir Blake, he went too far. He uncovered something he should not have. And now, you are involved, Monsieur Poirot, because you have come too close to the very thing that we feared." Poirot's eyebrows arched slightly. He had heard the name Langley before, mentioned in passing by Mrs. Hamilton, the servant who had seen nothing, yet knew more than she let on. Langley was not a name of high prominence, but something about his words and the calm confidence with which he spoke suggested a connection to the deeper forces at play in this case. The quiet, dangerous undercurrent that ran through Langley's presence made Poirot pause. This was no ordinary acquaintance of Sir Blake. "Monsieur Langley," Poirot said slowly, his tone never wavering, "you speak of something Sir Blake uncovered, something too dangerous, too important for anyone to know. But I must ask you, why come to me now? What is it that you seek to reveal?" Langley's expression darkened, his lips tightening as he leaned forward. "Sir Blake uncovered the truth about a royal lineage that has been hidden for centuries, a bloodline that has been erased from history, one that holds the key to the true throne of this country. He was not just researching historical documents, Poirot. He was uncovering a conspiracy to erase the true rulers of this nation and replace them with puppets who serve only their own interests." Poirot listened intently, his mind absorbing the weight of Langley's words. A royal conspiracy, a bloodline lost to history. The pieces were beginning to align, but Poirot knew better than to rush to conclusions. There was still so much that was unclear, so many unanswered questions. "And Sir Blake's murder, Monsieur Langley?" Poirot asked, his voice steady. "How does this tie into his death?" Langley's face hardened, his eyes flashing with a mix of fear and anger. "His death was no accident," he said, with certainty. "He was killed because he was getting too close to the truth. There are those who will stop at nothing to keep it hidden, Poirot. Sir Blake's research threatened everything. Everything they've worked for. Everything they've built. The royal family, the politicians, the powerful families. They all have something to lose." Poirot took a deep breath, his fingers tapping rhythmically on the arm of his chair. He knew that Langley was telling him only part of the story, the part he was willing to reveal. But something about his words rang true. Sir Blake had been on the verge of something monumental, something that could tear apart the very foundations of power. And now, someone had killed him to ensure that the truth would never see the light of day. "You come here to warn me then?" Poirot asked, his eyes fixed on Langley. "To stop me from uncovering more?" Langley's eyes flickered, but he quickly regained his composure. "No, Monsieur Poirot," he said, his voice tinged with regret. "I am here because I cannot let Sir Blake's work be buried. I am here to help you find the truth, to finish what he started. But you must be careful. The people we are dealing with are powerful, and they will not hesitate to destroy anyone who stands in their way. Poirot nodded, his mind racing as the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. Langley had been involved with Sir Blake's research, but he was also a man who seemed to understand the gravity of the situation, perhaps too well. Langley's own motives were unclear, but Poirot sensed that he was not the villain in this story. He was merely another player in a far larger game, one that had been set in motion long before Poirot had arrived. With a final, lingering glance, Langley stood and bowed his head slightly. "I will be in touch, Monsieur Poirot. But remember, the truth you seek is not just a history lesson, it is a dangerous weapon. Use it wisely." As Langley left the room, the door closing softly behind him, Poirot remained seated, his fingers steepled in front of him. The mystery deepened, the stakes grew higher, and the sense of danger hung heavily in the air. Langley had just revealed a new layer to the case, one that was far more dangerous than Poirot had anticipated. The murder of Sir Arthur Blake was no longer just a matter of academic rivalry or a royal scandal. It was a matter of power, of control over the future of a nation. And as Poirot prepared for the next steps in his investigation, he knew one thing for certain. The truth was closer than ever, but it was a truth that would come at a cost. The shadows of the past were not just lingering, they were closing in, and Poirot could feel their cold breath on his neck. Chapter 6. The Final Witness. The atmosphere within the Blake estate had grown heavier with each passing day. The dark clouds hanging low in the sky seemed to mirror the tension that now suffused every room of the house. The unanswered questions about Sir Arthur Blake's murder lingered like an unseen specter, casting a shadow over every conversation, every corner of the estate. Poirot, ever meticulous and ever patient, had slowly begun to piece together the fragments of a puzzle that seemed, at times, far too complex to solve. But one thing was certain: the truth was hidden somewhere, locked away behind layers of secrets and fears that people were reluctant to confront. Poirot sat alone in the study, the same study where Sir Blake had spent countless hours working on his manuscript. The weight of the case was growing, but Poirot, as always, remained calm. His fingers lightly tapped on the edge of his chair, a soft rhythm that matched the ticking of the clock on the wall. Despite his calm demeanor, Poirot was aware that the clock was ticking down, not just for the case, but for the secrets still buried in the Blake estate. The discovery of Isabel Warren's letters and Sir Blake's research had shed light on the powerful conspiracy surrounding the royal bloodline. Langley's cryptic warnings had only deepened the mystery. Now, Poirot knew that the answers could no longer be found in the past alone. They were in the present, among those who had been closest to Sir Blake. And there was one person who could still provide the missing piece of the puzzle: Mrs. Hamilton, the servant who had witnessed nothing, yet knew more than she had let on. It was time for Poirot to confront her again. He stood from his chair, the soft rustling of his coat the only sound in the room. His mind was clear, his purpose unwavering. Mrs. Hamilton's role in the events leading up to Sir Blake's murder had always been shrouded in ambiguity. But Poirot knew one thing for certain: she was the key to unraveling the final threads of this mystery. As Poirot approached the door, he heard the faint sound of footsteps outside the study. Mrs. Hamilton appeared in the doorway, her expression tense, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. Her face was pale, as though the weight of her own guilt were beginning to show through the cracks of her carefully composed demeanor. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, her voice barely a whisper, "you wanted to speak with me." Poirot nodded, his gaze calm and steady. "Yes, madame. I believe you are the final witness in this case, the missing piece of the puzzle." Mrs. Hamilton's eyes flickered with a mix of fear and resignation. She stepped into the room slowly, as if walking toward her own fate. Poirot motioned for her to sit, and she complied, her movements stiff and uncertain. "You were present the night Sir Blake died," Poirot began, his voice low and measured. "And you have told me that you saw nothing, heard nothing. But I do not believe you, madam. You know more than you have said. It is time you told me the truth." For a moment, Mrs. Hamilton said nothing. Her hands were trembling, and Poirot could see the internal struggle playing out behind her eyes. The silence between them stretched, but Poirot remained patient. He knew that the truth would come in its own time. The question was not whether she would speak, but when. Finally, Mrs. Hamilton took a deep breath and spoke, her voice faltering. "I didn't mean for it to happen," she said, her words tumbling out in a rush. "I was afraid of what would happen if I didn't do as I was told. Edward Forsyth, he threatened me." Poirot leaned in slightly, his gaze sharp. Forsyth's name had come up several times in their discussions, but this was the first time anyone had mentioned him in connection with Sir Blake's death. "He threatened you, madame?" Poirot asked softly. "What did he want from you?" Mrs. Hamilton looked down at her hands, her voice barely audible. "He knew about the manuscript. He knew about what Sir Blake had uncovered, about Isabel Warren's connection to the royal bloodline. He wanted it. Forsyth. He wanted to steal it. He wanted to use Sir Blake's research for his own gain. And he said that if I didn't help him, if I didn't steal the manuscript for him, he would make sure I lost my job, and much more." Poirot watched her closely, his mind working to piece together what she had just revealed. "So, you helped Forsyth?" he asked, his voice gentle but firm. "You took the manuscript for him?" Mrs. Hamilton nodded, her eyes filled with shame. "Yes, but I didn't know what to do. I was scared. And then Sir Blake confronted me. He said he knew something was wrong, that someone had been tampering with his research. I was terrified, monsieur. I didn't want him to find out that it was me. I didn't want him to know I was involved. But then, that night, I couldn't stop it. I didn't know how to stop it." Poirot's eyes softened as he understood the complexity of Mrs. Hamilton's involvement. She had been manipulated, driven by fear into a situation that had spiraled beyond her control. She was not the mastermind, but she was complicit, trapped by the very people who had used her. "And when Sir Blake confronted you," Poirot continued, his voice soothing, "did he threaten you? Did he try to stop you?" Mrs. Hamilton shook her head slowly. "No, he didn't threaten me. But he told me that if I didn't help him, if I didn't stop Forsyth, he would go to the authorities. He would expose everything. I knew that if Sir Blake found out the truth, everything would be ruined. Forsyth would kill me, and I couldn't let that happen." Poirot nodded slowly, his expression one of deep understanding. "So, you killed Sir Blake?" he asked, his voice steady. "You did it to protect yourself and to protect Forsyth?" Mrs. Hamilton's face crumpled with guilt, her eyes filling with tears. "Yes, I didn't mean to. I just wanted to stop him from finding out." But when Sir Blake came at me, when he tried to take the manuscript from me, I panicked. Poirot's heart felt a twinge of sympathy for the woman, but his duty remained clear. "You acted in fear, madame," he said softly, his voice calming, "but you took a life. The truth must come to light." Mrs. Hamilton nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I know. I am sorry. I never wanted any of this to happen, but I couldn't see a way out. I was trapped." Poirot stood up, his movements smooth and deliberate. "The truth is a dangerous thing, madame," he said quietly, "but it is also the only way to bring peace. You will face the consequences of your actions, but you have freed yourself from the burden of silence." As Mrs. Hamilton was taken away by the authorities, Poirot stood alone in the study. The case was closed, but the weight of the truth remained. Sir Blake's death had been a tragic consequence of a conspiracy far larger than anyone had realized. Forsyth's role in the murder was now clear. He had orchestrated the entire plan, using fear and manipulation to control Mrs. Hamilton. The royal secret that Sir Blake had uncovered was now safe from the public eye, but the shadows it cast would linger long after the case had been solved. Poirot stood by the window, looking out at the darkened estate, the night sky stretching endlessly above him. The mystery was solved, but the truth, he knew, would always have a price. Chapter 7. The Royal Secret. The rain fell steadily outside the Blake estate, the steady patter of droplets against the windows like the ticking of an unseen clock, marking the passage of time. Inside, the atmosphere was thick with the weight of the mystery that had gripped the estate for days. Hercule Poirot stood at the window, watching the storm rage outside, his mind turning over the events that had unfolded thus far. The answers were within his reach. He could feel it. Yet with every answer, more questions seemed to arise. Sir Arthur Blake's murder had become something much larger than just a crime of passion or greed. It was a web of royal secrets, hidden bloodlines, and conspiracies stretching back for centuries. Poirot had known from the beginning that this case would not be easily solved. But as he stood there, watching the rain blur the world outside, he knew that the truth would soon be revealed, whether those in power wished it or not. The manuscript was now in his possession, a tattered, weathered document that Sir Blake had worked tirelessly to uncover. And with it came the key to a long-lost royal secret, one that had been buried beneath layers of history and deception. A bloodline, hidden away to preserve the power of the monarchy, had been exposed by Sir Blake's diligent research. It was the reason Forsyth had murdered him, the reason Mrs. Hamilton had been manipulated into stealing the manuscript, the reason that, in the end, Poirot had been called to investigate. But the secret that had driven so many to commit murder was more dangerous than Poirot had imagined. The royal family, as he had suspected, was not merely trying to suppress the truth. They were fighting for their very survival. Poirot turned from the window and moved to the desk where the manuscript lay, its pages now carefully examined and meticulously catalogued. As he looked down at the text, the full gravity of what Sir Blake had uncovered settled upon him. The royal bloodline that had been hidden for generations was not just a secret. It was the rightful lineage to the throne, a claim that could topple the very monarchy that ruled the country. Sir Blake had stumbled upon a truth so volatile, so destructive, that it had cost him his life. And now, the question was, What would Poirot do with this knowledge? The detective took a deep breath, his fingers lightly brushing the edge of the manuscript. He had already uncovered so much, yet the most important piece of the puzzle remained. There was one final piece of the puzzle he had yet to find, something that would reveal the full extent of the conspiracy and the identity of the true heir to the throne. The royal family had done everything in their power to conceal this secret, but now it was in Poirot's hands. As Poirot contemplated the weight of the truth, there was a soft knock at the door. "Come in," Poirot called, his voice steady but laced with the growing tension in the air. The door opened slowly, and Margaret Warren entered the room, her face drawn and pale. The same woman who had once spoken of her great-aunt's dangerous legacy now looked like someone who had seen too much of the truth that had been kept hidden for so long. "Poirot," she said softly, her voice carrying the weight of something unspoken. "I know what you've uncovered, and I know what Sir Blake was about to reveal. But you must understand, the consequences of exposing this secret are far greater than you can imagine." Poirot raised an eyebrow, his gaze sharp as he studied her. "I am aware of the risks, madam, but the truth must come to light. The people have a right to know what has been hidden from them." Margaret's eyes flickered, a flash of something dark passing over her features. She stepped closer to the desk, her hands trembling as she spoke. "It's not just about the throne, Poirot," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "It's about everything. The monarchy, the nobility, the very structure of society. If the truth comes out, it will destroy everything. People will lose their faith in the system, and chaos will follow. It's not just a matter of one person claiming the throne. It's about the collapse of everything that has been built over centuries." Poirot listened carefully, his expression unchanged, though he could sense the depth of her concern. "You fear the chaos that would follow," Poirot said, his voice soothing yet firm. "But chaos is already here, madam. Sir Blake was killed. People have already died to keep this secret. Can you not see that the truth, no matter how dangerous, is the only path forward? It is the only way to prevent further bloodshed." Margaret's eyes lowered, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. "But you don't understand," she whispered, almost to herself. "My family was the one who helped conceal the truth. We were part of the conspiracy, Poirot. Isabel Warren, my great-aunt, she was the one who helped erase the bloodline from history. She was complicit in the deception." Poirot's mind raced as the pieces of the puzzle clicked into place. Isabel Warren, a key figure in the conspiracy, had not merely been a bystander. She had been an active participant in hiding the true heir. Her ties to the royal family, her role in the cover-up, it all began to make sense. "You are telling me, Madame," Poirot said slowly, "that your family played a role in ensuring that the secret remained buried? That Isabel Warren, despite her apparent opposition to the monarchy, was actually involved in hiding the truth?" Margaret nodded, her face filled with sorrow. "Yes, she believed it was for the greater good. But in the end, she died with the secret still locked away. And now it seems it has been uncovered once more. And I fear what will happen when the world knows the truth." Poirot stood still for a moment, his eyes never leaving Margaret's face. His mind was racing with the implications of what she had just revealed. This was not just a historical mystery. It was a living, breathing conspiracy, that spanned generations. The royal bloodline, hidden for centuries, was now poised to be revealed. But at what cost? Margaret's voice broke through his thoughts. "Please, Poirot," she pleaded, her voice trembling. "I beg you, do not expose this. The world is not ready for the truth. The chaos it would cause. I cannot bear it." Poirot's expression softened, but his resolve remained unshaken. "Madame," he said, his voice calm but resolute, "the truth has a way of revealing itself, whether we are ready for it or not. It cannot remain buried forever. If we do not uncover it, it will continue to fester, to poison everything it touches. The world may not be ready for it, but that does not mean it should not be known." Margaret stood silently for a long moment, the weight of her family's involvement pressing heavily on her. Finally, she nodded, a tear slipping down her cheek. "I understand," she whispered. Poirot turned back to the desk, his gaze lingering on the manuscript. The truth, he knew, was more than just a historical revelation. It was a weapon, one that could change the course of the future. But it was also the only way to restore justice, to bring an end to the lies that had been told for so long. The storm outside continued to rage, the wind howling against the windows. But inside the study, the air had grown still, heavy with the knowledge that the truth would soon be revealed. The final pieces of the puzzle had fallen into place, and Poirot knew that the moment of reckoning was at hand. Chapter 8. The Unraveling of the Plot. The storm had subsided by the time Poirot entered the drawing room, its fading echoes replaced by a quiet tension that lingered in the corners of the estate. The storm outside had raged with all the fury of nature, but inside the Blake estate, the storm was far more dangerous. The storm of truth and deception that had slowly been unraveling for days. The air was thick with the secrets that had been hidden for so long, each revelation peeling back the layers of a mystery that had grown darker with every step Poirot took. He walked slowly across the room, his steps deliberate, each movement filled with the calm confidence that came from years of unraveling the most intricate of mysteries. As he approached the large table where the pieces of the case lay before him, his mind worked steadily, calculating, observing, and analyzing every element of the story he had pieced together. Sir Arthur Blake's death had been more than just a murder. It had been the culmination of decades of hidden truths, royal conspiracies, and a bloodline erased from history. Poirot had uncovered the key players: Edward Forsyth, the rival historian who had been desperate to get his hands on the manuscript; Mrs. Hamilton, the servant who had been manipulated by Forsyth's threats; and Margaret Warren, who had revealed the dark legacy of her family's involvement in the royal cover-up. All the pieces had fallen into place, but there was still one final part of the puzzle that Poirot had yet to confront: the truth behind the royal secret Sir Blake had uncovered. It was time for the final confrontation. Poirot had arranged for all the remaining players in the drama to gather in the drawing room. The room, once a place of comfort and refuge, now felt cold and foreboding. The only light came from the flickering fire in the hearth, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Each figure who entered the room added to the tension that was now palpable in the air. Forsyth entered first, his posture stiff, his expression unreadable. Margaret followed, her face still drawn with the weight of the secrets she had revealed, though she held her head high. Mrs. Hamilton entered last, her face pale and her eyes downcast, still carrying the burden of guilt and fear that had led her to kill Sir Blake. Poirot, standing at the center of the room, glanced over them all. He could see the weight of their nervousness, the unease they felt in facing him now. He had already uncovered the layers of their involvement, but this meeting was necessary to tie the threads together. It was time to confront the full truth and to ensure that justice would be served. Mesdames et messieurs, Poirot began, his voice steady, soothing yet commanding. The time has come for the truth to be fully revealed. The secrets that have driven this chain of events, the murder of Sir Arthur Blake, and the conspiracy that has haunted us, must be understood by all. His gaze moved from Forsyth to Mrs. Hamilton, and finally to Margaret. You, Monsieur Forsyth, Poirot continued, his eyes narrowing, are the one who orchestrated the theft of Sir Blake's research. You knew what he had uncovered, the royal bloodline that had been hidden away for generations. You knew the truth could destroy everything. Forsyth's face twitched, but he said nothing, the tension in his jaw betraying his attempt to remain composed. He had been caught, and there was no escape from the weight of his actions now. Poirot turned his attention to Mrs. Hamilton. And you, madam, Poirot said gently, were caught in the middle of it all. You were manipulated by Forsyth's threats, coerced into stealing the manuscript. You didn't want to hurt anyone, but in your fear, you made the tragic decision to end Sir Blake's life. You thought you were protecting yourself. Mrs. Hamilton flinched, her hands trembling as she wiped away a tear. I never meant for it to go this far, she whispered. I was terrified, but I couldn't see a way out. Poirot's eyes softened, but there was no pity in them, only a quiet understanding. You were afraid, madame, he said softly. But fear cannot be allowed to rule our actions. The truth is always more powerful than fear. Now, you must face the consequences of your actions. Turning his gaze to Margaret, Poirot's voice took on a more somber tone. And you, Madame Warren, were complicit in this conspiracy, in hiding the true heir to the throne. Your family played a part in erasing a royal bloodline from history, but you also chose to come forward to reveal the truth, despite the danger it would cause you. Margaret's eyes met Poirot's, and for a moment, there was a flicker of relief in her expression. I couldn't keep the secret any longer, she said quietly. I knew it was wrong, but I was bound by my family's legacy. When Sir Blake came so close to the truth, I realized how much damage it could cause if it came to light. But in the end, I couldn't live with the guilt of knowing it had been hidden. Poirot nodded, his mind processing the final pieces of the case. Each person in the room had played a part in the unraveling of the conspiracy, but each had also contributed to their own downfall. Forsyth's greed, Mrs. Hamilton's fear, and Margaret's guilt had all led to the tragic murder of Sir Blake. Yet in the end, it was the truth that had emerged victorious, and Poirot had been the one to bring it to light. It is clear, Poirot said, his voice calm but firm, that Sir Blake's death was not an accident. It was a murder born from fear and greed, from a desire to keep the truth hidden. The royal bloodline that has been erased from history, the one that Sir Blake uncovered, is the key to understanding everything that has happened. But that truth, as powerful as it is, must be handled carefully. It cannot be allowed to destroy everything it touches. Margaret, her eyes filled with tears, nodded. What will happen? Now? She asked softly. Poirot's gaze remained steady. Now, we must face the consequences. The truth is out. The royal family's legacy, hidden for so long, must be acknowledged. But the world is not ready to accept such a revelation. It will bring upheaval, chaos, perhaps even destruction. But it is the truth, and it must be faced. He turned to Mrs. Hamilton and Forsyth, his voice growing colder. You will face the law, of course. Your actions cannot go unpunished. You may have been driven by fear, but you took a life, and for that, justice must be served. There was silence in the room, a heavy silence filled with the knowledge that the case was reaching its end. The truth had come to light, but it had come at a great cost. The secrets that had been buried for generations were now exposed, and the consequences of that revelation would echo far beyond the walls of the Blake estate. Poirot turned toward the window, the storm now fully subsiding, leaving behind a sense of quiet resignation. The case was solved, but the mystery of the royal bloodline was far from over. The truth had been uncovered, but its impact would be felt for years to come. As Poirot stood there, contemplating the complexity of the case and the weight of the truth, he knew that some mysteries, once solved, could never truly be put to rest. They would linger, ever present, casting long shadows over the world. Chapter 9. The resolution. The rain had finally stopped, leaving behind a damp stillness that clung to the air. The world outside seemed washed clean, the sky now a pale, almost serene gray, as if reflecting the quiet aftermath of the storm. Inside the Blake estate, however, the air still held the weight of unspoken truths, the lingering tension of secrets that had once been buried deep in history. The storm outside had passed, but the storm within the walls of the estate had yet to settle. Hercule Poirot sat by the window in the study, staring out at the now silent grounds. The world outside seemed calm, but the detective knew better. The revelations of the past few days had shaken everything. Sir Arthur Blake's murder, the royal conspiracy, the hidden bloodline that had caused such a tumult of emotions, and the desperate measures people had taken to keep it all hidden. And yet, through it all, Poirot had remained steadfast in his pursuit of the truth. The case was nearing its end, but there were still pieces of the puzzle to resolve, still a sense of finality to reach. As Poirot sat, lost in thought, the door opened softly. Margaret Warren entered, her face still pale from the heavy emotions of the past few days. There was something different in her demeanor now, though, something lighter, as if the burden of the secret that had haunted her for so long had finally begun to lift. Poirot, she said quietly, her voice a gentle echo in the stillness of the room. I wanted to thank you for everything, for uncovering the truth, for helping me understand what happened, and for helping me make peace with my family's legacy. Poirot turned his head slowly, his eyes meeting hers. His expression, as always, was calm, but there was a subtle softness to his gaze. He had watched Margaret struggle with the weight of her family's involvement in the royal conspiracy. She had carried that burden with her, but now, in the quiet of the study, Poirot could see that she had begun to understand the importance of facing the truth, no matter how painful. You are welcome, madame, Poirot said softly. But it is you who have made the difficult choice to come forward and face the past. It is not easy to confront such dark truths, especially when they are so closely tied to your family. But you have chosen the right path. The truth, as always, is the only way forward. Margaret nodded, a hint of a smile tugging at the corners of her lips. I never realized how much the past could affect the present. How much we are shaped by the secrets we keep. But now I see that the only way to move on is to acknowledge the past, no matter how uncomfortable it may be. Poirot's gaze softened, and he stood up from his chair, moving toward the window once more. The rain had stopped, but the ground was still slick, the puddles reflecting the gray sky like mirrors. It was a peaceful sight, and yet Poirot knew that in this case, peace was still elusive. The resolution of this case, Poirot said, his voice smooth but heavy with meaning, has brought closure to Sir Blake's murder. But the implications of the truth we have uncovered reach far beyond the walls of this estate. The royal family's legacy, the bloodline that was hidden for so long, it is a matter that will ripple through history. And as much as we might wish for peace, the truth has a way of bringing change. It is inevitable. Margaret's eyes clouded with uncertainty, and she looked away from Poirot's steady gaze. But what now? What happens to the truth? To the legacy Sir Blake uncovered? Will it remain hidden, or will it come to light? The world may not be ready for such a revelation. Poirot paused, his fingers gently tracing the edge of the window pane, as if considering her words. He turned to face her, his expression both serene and resolute. Madame, the truth is a powerful thing. It does not wait for the world to be ready for it. It comes, whether we are prepared or not. But it is not for us to decide the course it will take. The truth is its own force. He let the silence linger for a moment, the weight of his words hanging in the air between them. Margaret's eyes met his, and there was a quiet understanding between them, a recognition of the enormity of what had just been revealed, of the responsibility that came with knowing the truth. The death of Sir Blake, Poirot continued, his voice now gentle but firm, was not a simple act of murder. It was the result of fear, of power, and of the lengths people will go to keep the truth buried. But now, that truth is no longer hidden. It has been uncovered. And though the consequences will be far-reaching, it is the only way forward. Margaret nodded slowly, as if absorbing the depth of his words. And what about Forsyth? She asked quietly, her voice tinged with regret. What happens to him? Poirot's expression hardened for a moment, a flicker of resolve in his eyes. Forsyth is a man driven by greed and ambition. His role in Sir Blake's death cannot be ignored. He will face justice, as will Mrs. Hamilton. Justice cannot be compromised. But as for the royal family, that is not something I can dictate. They will decide how they wish to move forward. The room grew quiet once more, the fire crackling softly in the hearth. Poirot could feel the weight of the finality of it all. The case had been solved, the murderer unmasked, and the royal secret laid bare. But the truth, as he had always known, was never easy to bear. And in this case, the truth had come with a price. Margaret stood by the window for a moment, her eyes distant. What happens to the manuscript? She asked softly, her voice almost a whisper. The truth it contains? Will it ever be shared with the world? Poirot sighed, his expression unreadable. The manuscript, like the truth it holds, is a dangerous thing. It can bring about great change, but it can also destroy. Sometimes it is better left undisturbed. for the world is not always ready for the weight of such knowledge. Margaret looked at him, her gaze steady but tinged with sadness. Then what do we do with it? Poirot turned his head slightly, his eyes meeting hers. We let the world carry on for a time. We allow the storm to pass, and then, perhaps, when the time is right, the truth will emerge. But until then, we must trust that the past has its place and that the future will find its own way. Margaret nodded, a quiet resignation settling in her heart. She understood now. Sometimes the truth was too powerful, too dangerous to be revealed all at once. The world needed time to heal, to come to terms with the revelations that had been forced into the light. Poirot turned away from the window and began to move toward the door. The case was over, and the truth had been revealed. But he knew that the echoes of this mystery would resonate far beyond the Blake estate. The royal secret, though exposed, would linger like a shadow over the future. And as Poirot stepped out into the hallway, the air seemed lighter, as if the storm had passed, but the calm that followed was only the calm before a new storm. Chapter 10. The Last Truth. The air in the Blake estate was still, a quiet aftershock from the storm that had passed. Outside, the sky had cleared, leaving behind the kind of calm that follows the end of something monumental. Inside, however, there was a sense of finality that hung in the atmosphere, as if every shadow, every creak of the floorboards carried the weight of secrets that had been buried for far too long. Hercule Poirot sat at the same desk where Sir Arthur Blake had spent his final days. The papers were now sorted, the case closed, and the mystery unraveled. Yet, as Poirot surveyed the room, he couldn't shake the feeling that there was one final moment yet to come. The last piece of the puzzle, the last truth that needed to be confronted before the curtain could fall on the case. It had been a long and winding road to this point. The murder of Sir Blake, the royal bloodline uncovered, the manipulation by Forsyth, Mrs. Hamilton's confession, and Margaret Warren's reluctant yet brave revelation of her family's dark history. Each piece had led Poirot to this quiet conclusion. The murder had been the act of desperation, but the motivations behind it were far deeper than anyone had anticipated. The truth about the royal family, the secret bloodline that had been hidden for centuries, had cost Sir Blake his life. But the real question, Poirot knew, was not just about who had killed him. It was about what would happen with the truth that had been uncovered. As Poirot sat in the study, his fingers lightly tapping the edge of the desk, he heard a soft knock at the door. His mind, still processing the weight of the case's conclusion, turned toward the sound. He knew it wasn't Mrs. Hamilton, Forsyth, or even Margaret. It was someone else, someone whose presence he hadn't fully anticipated, but whose appearance had been part of his careful calculations. "Come in," Poirot called, his voice smooth, but filled with the calm intensity that always accompanied him in moments of final revelation. The door creaked open, and in stepped a familiar figure, a figure Poirot had not seen since the very beginning of the case. Margaret Warren entered the room, her face still carrying the weight of her family's secret. But there was something different in her demeanor now. Her posture was straighter, her expression more resolved. She no longer seemed burdened by guilt, but by a quiet determination, as though she had made peace with the past and was now ready to face the future. Poirot watched her closely, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Ah, madame," he said, his tone gentle yet probing. "I see you have come to speak once more. There is something you wish to say?" Margaret stood before him, her hands clasped in front of her. "Poirot," she began, her voice steady, but carrying the weight of something unsaid. "I've been thinking about what you said, about the truth. I've come to realize that while I've made peace with my family's past, there is still something I must do, something I must face." Poirot raised an eyebrow, his interest piqued. "What is it, madam? What is this last truth that you feel must be confronted?" Margaret took a deep breath before speaking, her words measured, as if she were speaking the truth for the first time. "I am the last person who should be speaking of justice," she said softly. "But I can no longer stand in the shadows of what was done. The royal bloodline Sir Blake uncovered. My family played a part in its concealment. We were not just protectors of the secret. We were active participants in its burial. Isabel Warren, my great aunt, helped erase that truth. And I..." Margaret's voice faltered, the weight of the confession nearly choking her. Poirot watched her carefully, his face unreadable, but his eyes soft with understanding. He had known all along that this was where the story would lead. The truth always has its cost, and sometimes even those closest to the mystery must confront their role in it. "You were complicit in the secret, Madame," Poirot said gently, "but you are not its creator. The truth is always more complicated than we wish, but you have come forward now, and that is what matters." Margaret shook her head slowly, her eyes filled with a mixture of regret and resolve. "I have spent years trying to hide from it, Poirot. My family, my heritage, it's all tied to this secret. And now, it's all come to light. But I know that, despite the turmoil it may cause, the truth has a power all its own. It must be acknowledged." Poirot gave a small nod, his fingers steepled in front of his lips. "Yes, madam. The truth is always powerful, whether we are ready for it or not. But now that it has been uncovered, we must decide how to move forward. We cannot undo the past, but we can shape the future with the choices we make." Margaret hesitated before speaking again. "But what of Forsyth? What of my family's role in all of this? Can we ever truly escape the consequences of what was done?" Poirot's gaze softened. "Ah, that is the most difficult question of all, madame. You see, truth is not a simple thing. It is not just a matter of exposing the hidden. It is about reconciling with what it means. Forsyth, Mrs. Hamilton, and even your family, they will all face the consequences of their actions. But justice is not simply about punishment. It is also about redemption. It is about acknowledging the past and using that understanding to move forward. You have already begun that process by confronting the truth." Margaret's eyes softened as she absorbed his words, her shoulders relaxing just slightly. "And what of the manuscript? The truth it holds. Will it be shared with the world?" Poirot turned his gaze to the manuscript, lying carefully on the table before him. "The manuscript is but a piece of a much larger truth. Yes, it holds the key to a royal legacy, but it is also a symbol of the price that must be paid to uncover such a truth. Whether or not it is shared with the world is not for me to decide. But one thing is certain, madam. The world will change. The truth has a way of doing that." For a moment, there was silence between them, the weight of the finality of the case settling in the air. Margaret stepped closer, her voice soft, but clear. "I understand now, Poirot. The truth, no matter how painful, is always the right path. It is the only way forward. Poirot nodded, his gaze steady. Yes, madam, and it is up to each of us to choose how we walk that path. As Margaret turned to leave, her shoulders squared with the quiet strength that came from facing the truth, Poirot sat back in his chair, the weight of the case lifting from him. The answers had been found. The truth had been revealed. And though it had come at a high cost, the mystery was over. But even as Poirot allowed himself a small, rare smile, he knew that the truth was never truly finished. It would linger, its echoes reverberating through the lives of those who had been touched by it. And the world, in its own time, would begin to reckon with what had been uncovered. For Poirot, the case was closed, but the journey of the truth had only just begun.